Okay. All right. Great. So we are continuing on. Remember, we're on our little excursus into the doctrine of hell. We are on the second of the. Hold on, here, I'm getting feedback. We're on the second of the different, the three evangelical views, which is called eternal conscious torment. Again, that's where the belief is that sinners will be tormented and tortured by God in hell for all of eternity without end. And we went through last week, remember what I said is that, this view, one of the problems with the view is that it has to overcome the natural language that says that actually the wicked die, they perish, they're no more, there will be, suffer extinction. So they try to accomplish that in a few ways. One of them is to change the definition of death and perishing and die to meaning what? Do anyone remember what we said? What do they change it to? Separation. And so they base it off of Genesis. And of course, we looked at the Genesis account where it didn't have anything to do with separation. In fact, the Genesis 2 account is where God says, on the day that you do this, your death penalty will be decreed. Whether or not that death penalty is carried out immediately or sometime in the future, that's actually what is being said, not the idea of separation. Then we talked about the fact that Jesus says that in hell, it'll be unquenchable fire and the worm doesn't die. And we said, well, that's actually a reference back to Isaiah. And when you go to Isaiah, Isaiah was talking about dead bodies, not living people that are being tortured. And we also then looked at the other occurrences of unquenchable fire in the Old Testament. And we looked at every single one of those occurrences in the Old Testament means a fire that cannot be resisted or put out before it's accomplished what it's going to accomplish. But they are not fires that continue to exist. They just cannot be resisted by anybody. That's what unquenchable means. You can't quench them, but they do eventually go out. And so we looked at both of those first initial attempts to justify the position, said that they fail, right? So now what we're going to do is we're going to try to cover the other ones that are brought into it. And again, there's only about 10 verses that are used to justify the position. And that's not to slight it as if 10's nothing, but we're going to try to cover all 10 just to get through them and see what that view holds. The third one that we have here is the rich man that is being tormented in hell forever. And that comes from Luke chapter 16. This is the story, I'll call it story. Don't worry, I won't look at you. Yeah, I won't look at you. Okay, Rich, I'll try not to. So again, this Luke chapter 16 is the story is the story of the rich man and Lazarus, and of course, both the rich man and Lazarus die. Lazarus goes to Abraham's bosom, where it's beauty and peace, and it's where the righteous go. And of course, the wicked man, the rich man, goes to the wicked side of hell, where he then experiences some torment here. And of course, Jesus tells this parable. Now, we're actually going to break this parable down much later on, so don't worry about getting into the details of it. I just want to focus on the elements of the story that the advocates of eternal conscious torment will say, hey, well, look, here, this thing shows that eternal conscious torment is true. So that's the only part that I really want to focus on. Let me just read it for you again, just a reminder. It says, there was a rich man who was clothed in purple and fine linen, and who feasted sumptuously every day. And at his gate was laid a poor man named Lazarus, covered with sores, who desired to be fed with what fell from the rich man's table. Moreover, even the dogs came and licked his sores. The poor man died and was carried by the angels to Abraham's side. The rich man also died and was buried, and in Hades, again, Hades is not hell, okay? Hell is Gehenna. Hades is the Greek word for just the place of the dead, and it was the place of the dead for both the righteous and the wicked. Okay, the rich man was also died and buried, and in Hades, being in torment, he lifted up his eyes and saw Abraham far off and Lazarus at his side, and he called out, Father Abraham, have mercy on me, and send Lazarus to dip the end of his finger in water and cool my tongue, for I am in anguish in this flame. But Abraham said, Child, remember that you in your lifetime received your good things, and Lazarus in like manner bad things. But now he is comforted here, and you are in anguish. And besides all this, between you and us a great chasm has been fixed, in order that those who pass from here to you may not be able, and none may cross from there to us. And he said, Then I beg you, Father, to send him to my father's house, for I have 5 brothers, so that he may warn them, lest they also come into this place of torment. But Abraham said, They have Moses and the prophets, let them hear them. And he said, no, Father Abraham, but if someone goes to them from the dead, they will repent. And he said to them, if they do not hear Moses and the prophets, neither will they be convinced that someone should rise from the dead. All right, okay. So here we go. This is purported to be justification here for the doctrine of eternal conscious torment. And oops, hold on here a second here. Okay, went one too far. So here's the justification. This passage is describing the fate of the wicked in hell. The rich man is burning in hell. He's in anguish in hell. He can't escape it, but the fire does not consume him, right? He's still conscious and talking, and so the fire burns but doesn't consume. And because he can't go over to Abraham's bosom or vice versa, the rich man then can never escape hell. Therefore, the wicked will live forever in hell. Does that make sense? Okay, that's kind of the thought there. All right, so let's break this down. First of all, and this is going to be one of the easiest passages ever, because this passage literally has nothing to do with hell. So I'm going to give you a little bit more information, but this literally has nothing to do about hell, because this is all about what? Where? Hades, right? And this is actually talking about what happens to the righteous and the wicked in the what's called the intermediate state. The intermediate state is between the time we die, our first death, and the time of the resurrection, right? That's the intermediate state. And then once we're resurrected, then the wicked go to final judgment in hell, and the wicked go to live in the eternal order. So this is describing not hell, because hell, right now, hell is at least 1,007 years away, right? Let's say, if you're pre-trib, let's say the tribulation happens tonight, you still got 7 years of tribulation, 1,000 years of the Messianic kingdom. So this isn't describing that. In fact, by the time right now, this person theoretically has been in Hades for 2,000 years, but hell is still, 1,000 years or more in the future, depending on when God comes back. This is not talking about the hell at all. So it's actually cannot even be used.
Plus, as I understand, Jesus hasn't done anything yet. So until the cross came, I mean, all the stuff about hell and all really, the consummation takes place. So right now, it's like you said, an intermediate state, right?
Yeah. I mean, hell comes, of course, when after the Messianic kingdom, the millennial kingdom, the 1,000-year reign, then the wicked dead are raised to get resurrection bodies. They're raised. They stand before the great white throne judgment. They're judged, cast into hell. So this person here is clearly, in fact, there's nobody in hell right now.
Right.
There's no one in hell. In fact, even the wicked currently right now are in Hades. The righteous are not. After Christ was resurrected from the dead, he emptied Abraham's bosom. All the righteous now go to be with Christ. So when you die, you don't go to Abraham's bosom anymore. But the wicked, when they die, they still go to Hades, right? That's the holding place. Hades is just the place of the dead, right? So I just want to make sure we don't even really have to say anything more, because this has zero to do with hell. It's all about the intermediate state.
This real quick question. Is the other side of the chasm paradise?
Yeah, paradise. Exactly right. Yeah,
Okay.
Abraham's bosom and paradise are the same thing. Because Hades just described the place of the dead. The righteous had to go someplace, because remember, Book of Hebrews says that until Christ was able to go up and sprinkle his blood in the temple, the heavenly temple, we couldn't go there. So even the righteous had to have a place. So Hades was the holding place for all the dead. Righteous went to Abraham's bosom or paradise, and then the wicked would go to Hades. So this person here is just in Hades. So again, we don't have to say any more. Like this verse, no matter what it says, and we'll get to kind of what it says later on, it's not talking about hell at all. So there's just zero justification. But we will go a little further. Well, I mean, certainly they might draw images here, but I don't think in Catholicism purgatory is Hades. Purgatory is a once the wicked are resurrected and stand in judgment, then purgatory is an option for them, I think, at that point. Now, again, I don't know Catholic doctrine very well, so I could be wrong on that one.
I was raised with it.
Yeah.
And as it was explained to me, unless you're sinless, everybody goes to purgatory.
Yeah.
The question is, do you spend one day, a year, a decade, or 100 years?
Correct.
Everybody goes to purgatory anyway, depending on the amount of sin.
Yeah. Correct.
That's told me here.
They're prayed for, people.
Well, you can lower it by doing all these
But-
things, yeah.
Catholic doctrine aside, this is clearly not talking about hell. All right. And again, you know, where this gets a little bit crazy here is that some of your versions actually say that the person is in hell, but that's only because of the fact from, you know, Tyndale's 1525 translation onward, most of those English translations didn't differentiate between Gehenna, hell, and Hades, and they made them one. And so you'll read certain verses where it'll say hell, and if you actually go to the Greek, it's not hell at all. It's Hades, right?
NLT says place of the dead.
The place of the dead. That's all it is. Place of the dead. This is not hell. Okay. So the other thing, though, let me just, for those that may not be convinced or that need a little more convincing here, let me say a few more things on it. Notice that Hades and hell cannot be the same place, and the reason for that, well, there's lots of reasons. I actually could have had a whole bunch of like 3 or 4 other items that I had on here that I pulled out just for sake of brevity here. But if you go to Revelation chapter 20, verse 14, this is what it said. It says, "And death and Hades were thrown into the lake of fire," the lake of the second death, the lake of fire. The lake of fire is hell. So Hades itself gets thrown into the place called hell. They're not the same place. Of course, the reason for that is that when death and Hades, the place of the dead, get thrown into hell, they get destroyed. And the symbolism there is that death no longer is possible. Death no longer reigns because the place where people would go to die is destroyed, and the concept of death itself is destroyed in hell. So Hades actually gets thrown into hell. They're not the same place. All right. So the other thing here is that this rich man, again, he's in an intermediate state. Now remember, in the intermediate state, the wicked and the righteous don't have a what? A body. But clearly, the wicked in hell have a body. Okay, the wicked are resurrected and given their bodies are resurrected just like the righteous are. And so anyone that is wicked that gets thrown in hell has a body, but here this person is in the intermediate state, and that is a disembodied. So again, even the state of the individual is not the same. The other thing is that this text here doesn't say anything. You notice, I should ask the question. If you go back and look at it, there's nothing at all in the text that says anything about the length of the stay. Does that all make sense? But that's actually what you need if you're going to say this verse teaches eternal conscious torment. The one thing that's critical has to be what? Eternal. So there has to be an indication in it, and yet there's no indication at all. The only indication is that if you're dead, you know, Jesus says, like, look, having someone rise from the dead, you know, having Lazarus come back from the dead to go visit this man's 5 brothers isn't going to change that. So this individual isn't going to be able to change his disposition. Right? What you did on earth is what you get, right? You don't get a second chance. But it says nothing about how long that individual will actually be there. And that's actually what you need. You need the verse to clearly say that the rich man was going to be in there for all eternity. And the verse, frankly, doesn't say anything about time. There's no timing element in there at all. So we can just dispense of this. I put this little graphic in here. This is the part intermediate state. This is where both Lazarus, from a timeline perspective, Lazarus and the rich man are here. Hell is not until over here. There's a lot, so they're not the same place, not the same timing. So we can just dispense of Luke chapter 16, as interesting as it might be to use as an argument. It literally says nothing about hell. Okay. Before we go on, let me see if there's any questions about that. Yes.
So just a quick question. If it is this pre-resurrection
Yeah.
or is this like post-resurrection as well?
You mean resurrection of Christ or resurrection of people?
Of Christ.
Yeah, this is pre-resurrection because Christ is telling the story.
I'm
So-
just wondering because doesn't it in the New Testament say that when we die we'll be with Christ?
Yeah, that
I'm
happens
assuming that's
only.
not in paradise.
Yeah, because that's so. Yeah, just a clarification on that. Before the resurrection of Christ, so before he died and was resurrected, righteous believers and the wicked went to Hades, but they went to different compartments. Because remember, Christ hadn't sprinkled his blood on the holy temple, and that can only happen until after his death and his resurrection. Once he has did that and he ascended, he cleansed the temple, and then now the righteous believers go now to be with him in heaven, and Abraham's bosom is emptied. So now when you and I die, we don't go to Abraham's bosom, although the wicked still need a place to go, and that happens to be Hades, right? That's the difference, yeah.
But in Hades, there is flame there.
Yeah, here's the question though. I just want you to think about this. When we break down Luke 16, so I don't really want to get into Luke 16 now. I just want to cover the topic of hell when we get to it in depth. But I do want you to think about this, Mike. He's talking about it as if he is experiencing torment by fire. However, he doesn't have a body. So when we get to Luke 16, I want you to think about it, because when you interpret Luke 16, you have to take that into account. The guy literally has no body. He is a spirit. So how does, and I'll just let you ruminate on that for a while before we get to Luke 16. All right. Now we get to the next set of two verses here that we have that people will say, okay, these ones here are the nail in the coffin, right? These are nails in the coffin, because it talks about this weeping and this gnashing of teeth. So let's read it. We have basically similar accounts here in Luke and in Matthew. I'll just read Matthew's here, Matthew 13, verse 40 through 42. And again, this should be very familiar to this, because this is, again, referring back to one of the parables that Jesus told, right, about the gathering of the wheat and the tares. Just as the weeds are gathered and burned with fire, so will it be at the end of the age. Okay, the Son of Man, so at the end of the age. So this is what's going to happen. The weeds represent the wicked. So just as you take weeds, anyone like have a bonfire and you take like grass and you throw, what happens to grass when you throw it in there? Gone, 100%. Not like logs. You throw logs in there and logs can be burned and charred and you can still have part of the log. But when you throw like weeds in there, they just burn it completely. So this is what he's saying. Just like the weeds are gathered and burned with fire, that's actually what's going to happen to the wicked. He's just saying, like, look, all you do is go out and find a fire, grab some weeds, throw them in there, and what you see happens there is exactly what's going to happen to the wicked. That's what Jesus, this is his own words. The Son of Man will send his angels, and they will gather out of his kingdom all causes of sin and all lawbreakers, and throw them into the fiery furnace. Fiery furnace in this case is a reference to hell, right? In that place, there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. All right, okay. Now, how does this verse, or these two verses, justify eternal conscious torment? Because you really got to, like, certainly there's torment going on here. There's something going on here, right? There's fire involved. But what does it actually say? Now, here's the justification. This weeping and gnashing of teeth occurs in hell. They're thrown in the fiery furnace, and there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Weeping and gnashing of teeth is an indication of great physical and emotional pain. Therefore, the torment that they will experience in hell will be physical and emotional pain. You can't weep or gnash your teeth if you're not alive. Therefore, they have to be alive in hell in order to, gnash their teeth and weep. And that, since the Bible teaches that weeping and gnashing of teeth will go on for eternity, that means that, in fact, the wicked will suffer for eternity. So that is how these verses are used for the defense of that. Okay, now let's stop for a second. Let's ask ourselves some basic questions. Again, anytime we have hermeneutics, we've got to sort of sit back and think about what is actually being said. What's the context? What does the verse actually say? What does the verse not say, right? And is there a context around that to go from there? So the first thing is what about weeping and gnashing of teeth, right? What are some of the definitions? Well, in the Greek and Hebrew, weeping can mean either an expression of grief, usually expressed in mourning for the dead or things like that. You can also weep for joy, but obviously that's not Christ's intent here. So even though that is a possible definition of weeping, that's certainly not what he has involved here. This is clearly some sort of emotional pain. Like that seems to be very clear here. Gnashing, of course, means to grind or gnash your teeth, right? If you're like me, I wear a night guard at night because I grind my teeth, right? Well, If, you know, that's what happens. Okay. Now, here's the deal. Does the gnashing of teeth result from A, physical pain, or B, out of anger? Because it's used of both in Scripture, although more frequently, gnashing of teeth is in reference to anger, not to physical pain. So it's actually a Hebrew idiom for when someone gets so angry that we call it clench your teeth. You get so angry, clench your teeth and do that. That's the idea of gnashing teeth, is much more related to anger than it is to physical pain. Although, again, it can have both meanings depending on the context. And just a few examples of this, you can go back and do your own, word study of this and look for yourself. But, I've got a few examples here of how gnashing of teeth is used as an idiom. Psalm 35:16 says this: like profane mockers at a feast, they gnash me at me with their teeth. Right? They're angry. They're mocking him. So this is obviously anger, not physical pain. Job 16:9. He has torn me in his wrath and hated me. He has gnashed his teeth at me. My adversary sharpens his eyes against me. Again, this is anger, right? Not physical pain. Psalm 112:10. The wicked man sees it and is angry. He gnashes his teeth and melts away. The desire of the wicked will perish, right? Again, anger. Acts 7:54. Now, when they heard these things, again, this is the Jewish leadership, they were enraged and they ground their teeth at him. Okay? So it certainly can be gnashing of teeth, pain, but by far the most common way that phrase is used in Scripture, it doesn't have to do with pain, it has to do with anger. So Jesus said there's going to be weeping, so this emotional weeping about what's happening, and anger. Now, we don't know exactly who the anger is expressed at, and I'm not saying there can't be a physical element of this either. I'm not denying that. But I think pretty clearly the way that it's used mostly in Scripture, it's anger. Whether or not the anger is the individual when they're judged at the great white throne judgment is angry at themselves for being such an idiot. And I know I get angry at myself a lot, like, you're such an idiot sometimes. Or they're angry at God, is unclear. However, Paul does say in Romans that their deeds will be clearly displayed and will be clearly known. So I don't, I think it's personally a self-anger, because it's going to be clear to that person and everybody else that in fact God's righteous, his righteousness will be revealed. But either way, could be either one of those and some weeping. So again, but that doesn't answer the question, because all three views on hell say, yeah, of course, the wicked are going to weep and gnash their teeth. Even the universal reconciliationist says, well, gosh, you know what? They're not going to be happy with the fact that they've got to go through this refining process that's going to be really painful. And they're going to be angry that they can't just immediately enter into bliss and things like that. So all three of them would agree. So again, just the fact that Jesus says there's going to be weeping and gnashing of teeth doesn't actually support any of the three, because they all three believe that. That's kind of one of the first points that I want to make there, is that it doesn't say anything, because what they need to do is they need to say what. This verse needs to clearly say what if it's eternal conscious torment. We know they're conscious because they're weeping and gnashing of teeth. We know it's torment because they're suffering in fire, right? They're being tormented. So the conscious torment, the CT part of it is correct, but all three of the positions hold that. What do they need to prove from the verses in order to make it eternal conscious torment? What's missing? What's that? Correct. The time bound. There's a time bound element. Like, no one denies that the wicked are going to experience weeping and gnashing of teeth. All three views say yes. The question is, how long does the weeping and gnashing of teeth go on for? And what you need, if you are a defender of eternal conscious torment, you actually need these verses to give you some sort of a time boxed element, which they don't give. I mean, there's literally nothing here at all that's time boxed. So the only way that these verses are helpful if you're a advocate of eternal conscious torment is if you find other verses that you think clearly teach that. Then, of course, when you read these, you would read into a time boxed element that's actually not in the text. Does that all make sense? I mean, that would be totally fine. So the quest for eternal conscious torment advocates is they've still got to find verses that support them, because if not, these verses literally say nothing that's time boxed, right? There's nothing, there's, in fact, to be honest with you, there's literally nothing here that is difficult for any of the three positions. Does that make sense? So that's kind of the thing here. You just can't read that into it. Now, it's possible that there are some additional verses that we're going to cover that are successful from eternal conscious torment. And if so, then yeah, we would go back and read that into those verses and into all the other ones that we have found to be unsuccessful. It wouldn't be wrong for us to then read some stuff back into it, even if those verses within their immediate context or broader context didn't say anything to support eternal conscious torment. So our question is, do we have anything still coming forward that would cause us to think that? But as standalone verses, they just literally don't move the ball at all. Now, I would actually, yeah, I'll just say that they don't, yeah, they don't move the ball at all. All three views can align on those two verses and be fine. Before I go on to the next one, let me stop and see if there's some questions. Can you give that back to Ken there just to make sure? Yeah.
So you're saying then that weeping and gnashing of teeth through hermeneutics has to do with anger more so than torment?
Yeah, and hear me clearly though. I'm not saying that gnashing, excuse me, I'm not saying that gnashing of teeth can't be associated with someone who is in physical pain. All I'm saying is that when you look at how that's used throughout Scripture, the more common usage of that is that. Now, you do find people that, I don't think the expression gnashing of teeth is used though when people are dying of some sort of like, painful death. What I'm saying is when you look at gnashing of teeth as an idiom to describe something, you're going to find that it's being used. And I don't know, I'm not going to say exclusively because I'd have to go back and take a look, but the common way that that's used is anger.
I can see it as anger and, remorse that we have in regular life when we grind our teeth, like, I can't believe I did that.
Yeah.
But also in pain, you always bite down on something,
Sure.
when you're going to have pain given to you.
And
So,
here's the deal. All three of those, weeping, and then the two definitions of gnashing, those are all fine. I mean, it doesn't really matter because it doesn't change anything. Like, in fact, all three versions of hell would agree to that. Eternal conscious torment, annihilationism or conditional immortality, and even universal recognition says that, look, hell's going to be painful. We may not know exactly what it looks like, but there's going to be pain. So I don't think any of the three views would have a problem with gnashing describing both anger or physical pain.
So.
Oh, you've still got to know.
So it's really not a good place to be. There's no doubt about that, so
Correct.
it's our choice.
Correct.
And then in Matthew 13:43, then the righteous will shine like the sun in the kingdom of their Father.
Correct.
I think that's a good decision.
It is,
There
and
won't be any gnashing of teeth
again,
there.
when you, I mean, when you take a look there, it's very clear. Go ahead. It's very clear that that there's two different destinies here, which is why universal reconciliation, as much as I'd love that to be true, there's just so much that goes against it where it's very clear. The Bible's always putting this versus that. You can go this route or that route. Here's the destiny here. I mean, it's just constant all over the place that it's hard to get over that. Yeah. Correct. Well, yes. But also on the remedy to that, because the remedy is the important piece. But yes, correct.
Did you ever see people like on TV or some protesters? They are so angry that I bet you their teeth hurt the next day or right then and there. So, so associating it with, physical pain is not.
No. That's yeah. You just have to watch the news for a little bit, and I don't care what side of the political spectrum you're on, just to see people that bent out of shape in a significant way. Okay, so far we haven't found any verses that substantiate this idea that the wicked are tortured by God for all of eternity in hell by being burnt, but not fully burnt. So let's go on. Okay. Here we go with probably, now we're getting into the next several verses that we have, I think are the strongest verses that eternal conscious torment has. So we've covered what I'll call the weak ones, and I think they're very weak. Some of them don't even describe hell. These ones are going to get a little stronger. So let's figure out if any of them hold some water. Now, Matthew chapter 25, verses 45 to 46, that says this. This is again where Jesus is saying, whatever you did to me, the least of these, my brethren, you've done unto me. And, he's going to, the ones that, these ones are going to say, well, Lord, Lord, I mean, look, didn't we do X, Y, Z and whatever else? So now Jesus is going to answer the wicked. And he's going to say, then he will answer them, saying, truly, I say to you, as you did not do it to one of the least of these, you did not do it to me. And these will go, these wicked, the ones that didn't do it unto the least of these, and these will go away into eternal punishment, but the righteous into eternal life. All right, now that actually has, that feels like that's got some weight to it. That actually seems pretty good. And here's the justification for that. We have two eternals here, and they both have to mean the same thing, right? One eternal can't mean forever and ever and ever, and the other one just means some short period of time. That can't be the case. So, eternal speaks of something that lasts for eternity. It's going to last forever and ever, it's everlasting, right? And both eternals have to mean the same thing. They can't mean one thing in one sense and one thing in another sense. All right. Now, if eternal punishment, then, which is what the wicked are going to have, if that means that the act of punishing the unsaved, that is what continues for eternity. So for all of eternity, they are going to be eternally punished by God. And because of that, that must mean that if they're going to be punished eternally, they must continue to exist in order to be punished. You can't punish someone who's dead, right? So that's it, right? Jesus says, these go into eternal punishment, these go into eternal life. Well, we know the people that go into eternal life are living and enjoying life. These ones go into eternal punishment. Okay. Now let's see if this holds up. Because I think this is the first strong verse that we actually have gotten to so far in our study of this, the second version of hell. Okay, one thing we have to keep in mind is that what we have here, eternal punishment, or sometimes eternal salvation, eternal redemption, those are all what are called nouns of action, okay? And a noun of action can refer to either the act itself, the action itself, saving, like an ongoing act of saving or an ongoing act of punishing, right? So that the action continues, or it can refer to the result of the act. So there's an act that happens at one time, and then whatever the result of that is the thing that lasts for, in this case, eternity. Does that all make sense? Okay. So as a for instance, if we just say, the translation of the Bible, okay? Do you know what I mean by that? Because there's actually two things I could mean by that. I could mean the act of the translators actually translating the Bible. Like it took them a certain amount of time and they did this Bible translation. Like that is the noun of action of describing this event as this ongoing activity. Or I could say the translation of the Bible means whatever the translation is you're reading. If you're reading the NASB or the ESV or the NIV, no one is still doing what? Translating. So the translation of the Bible is the result of an activity that's now ceased. So the question is here is Jesus saying that eternal punishment is an ongoing act? In other words, the punishing is what is continuing for all of eternity. Or is the punishment, whatever the punishment is for the wicked, is the punishment what is eternal? Like, in other words, the result of the punishment is that is eternal. Okay, so, as a for instance, if you're going, if we're talking about just someone going into jail here, if you give, someone gets a death sentence, okay? Is that, which one of those is that? when the person has been executed, is it an action, an ongoing action, or is it the result of the punishment? Result, correct. Like forever that person's dead. Like once you're executed, I mean, take theology out of it, and we think about it in human terms. You execute someone, and guess what? That person's dead. So they don't continue to be electrocuted or to be shot. I mean, you're not out there just shooting the person. They continue to be like popping up, going like, okay, you missed me. I mean, like, you know what I'm talking about? Like it doesn't work that way. So it's either God is continuing for eternity to punish, or the punishment has an eternal result. Everyone good? It's either one of those two. Okay, so our question is, what is Jesus referring to? Because if he's saying that it is an ongoing act of punishing, then of course that supports eternal conscious torment. If, however, it's the result of the punishment has eternal consequences, then that doesn't support the eternal conscious torment. That would support conditional immortality, right? Okay, so it's really important for us to look at it. Now, the good thing is that, well, here's the bad thing. The bad part of this is that nouns of action like this can be one or the other, right? It may not be clear from the immediate context what is going on. Now, sometimes as you read the broader context, you have an understanding whether or not we're talking about an ongoing translation activity or whether you're talking about someone reading the result of a finished act, right? Those are from the context. From this context here in Matthew, Jesus doesn't really provide us a lot of information. So the bad part of this is that the immediate context isn't going to help us determine which of those two it is. That makes sense. Okay. The good news is that we actually see nouns of action related to, and I'm going to be specific here, nouns of action related specifically to the fate of individuals, the righteous and the wicked, in the age to come. We have plenty of examples of that in the New Testament, and we actually know what those mean. We know which one of those two it is. Does that make sense? Okay. So even though in the immediate context of Matthew we may not, we do know what those nouns of action look like when they refer to the fate of either the righteous or the wicked. And I'm going to give you some examples that we have here. And this is, I don't know if this is a complete list, but it's a fairly complete list of these types of nouns of action related to the word eternal, okay? Because that's the key thing here. It's not just redemption or saving or things like that. It is eternal something. And so we want to know when the Bible uses eternal something, a noun of action, eternal something, and it relates to the fate of either the wicked or the righteous, how does it use that construction? And if it uses it in a certain way, it would be odd for it to be used in a completely different way in one situation. Does that all make sense? That's what we're getting at here. So let's take a look at what we have. We have the first one, Hebrews 6, verse 1 through 2. And the writer of Hebrews is saying this: therefore, let us leave the elementary doctrine of Christ and go on to maturity, not laying again a foundation of repentance from the dead works and of faith toward God, and of instruction about washings, the laying on the hands, and the resurrection of dead, and eternal judgment. Okay, same thing, eternal judgment. Now, the writer is talking eternal judgment. He's talking about what happens when you stand before Christ, when the judgment happens, right? That's what is happening. Now, does he then mean an ongoing act of judging that never stops, judging that goes on for eternity? Or does he mean the result of the judgment lasts for eternity?
I think it's the result of the judgment.
Because think about this. Even if you had 1 trillion people that lived on the earth and they all have to walk and stand there before Christ, eventually he's going to do what? He's going to get through what? Everyone will be judged. I mean, even if it took 1 trillion years, a year for each person, eventually he's going to stop what? Judging. And in fact, that's what the New Testament picture is, that we're all judged, and then the judgment ends. These ones go to hell and these ones go to heaven. So this is the result of that judgment. It's an eternal judgment. Whatever Christ pronounces is something that will not be undone. It is irreversible, right? That's all that's saying. So this is clearly a result of a noun of action and not an ongoing aspect to it. All right. Mark 3:29 through 30. Again, you should be very familiar with this because this goes back to our discussion on the unpardonable sin. But Jesus says, "But whoever blasphemes against the Holy Spirit never has forgiveness, but is guilty of an eternal sin. For they were saying he has an unclean spirit." Now, we've already studied this, so this should be easy. Is this an ongoing sin that they continue to do, forever? Or is this a sin that they did in time that had eternal consequences? Number B. Number B. Correct. I mean, just think about the. Just think about. I mean, even if we hadn't studied the unpardonable sin, yeah, even if we hadn't studied the unpardonable sin, this wouldn't make any sense because the person literally would be doing the same sin for all of eternity, right? I mean, there's just like it doesn't make any sense there. But we know that what it was a one-time event that had consequences that were irreversible, right? The result of that. So again, we have a result of, not a ongoing action of for this noun action. All right, going back to Hebrews, chapter 9, verse 12. It says, he entered once for all into the holy places, not by means of the blood of goats and calves, but by means of his own blood, thus securing an eternal redemption. Okay? So is Jesus going to be redeeming mankind and, entering the holy place is his redemption process going on for all of eternity, or is that a one-time event that has eternal consequences for the redeemed?
Letter B.
Letter B. Seriously, we should game show host or a game show right here. You should, man, you'd be racking it up. Jesus died what? Once. In his death is the redemption that secures for us eternal redemption. He's not going through a redemptive process for all of eternity, right? It's the result of, not an ongoing action, okay? Hebrews 5:9, and being made perfect, Jesus became the source of eternal salvation to all who obey him. Okay, same thing. Is Jesus saving all the time? I'm not talking sanctification here. This is talking about salvation, right? Is he continuing for all of eternity while we're in heaven? Will he be doing salvific work, or has salvation been offered once for all by his death on the cross? Okay, it's pretty clear. Like this is a resultant. Same thing, Hebrews 9:15. Therefore, he is the mediator of a new covenant, so that those who are called may receive the promised eternal inheritance, since the death has occurred that redeems them from the transgressions committed under the first covenant. Okay, again, for all of eternity, is Jesus going to be coming up and saying, hey, look, you know what, here's a little bit more of your inheritance, and the next moment, here's a little bit more, like, is he always going to be giving you inheritance for all of eternity like this? Or is it like, this inheritance is yours for all of eternity? B, there we go, B, all right. Number two, door two. Okay, proper answer. Okay, so again, if you take a look at this, I put down here for this particular one, I put neutral to negative. The reason why I said neutral is because technically it could be one of the others. It could be either one. But when you look at how this is used, in particular, again, specifically used for what happens to the righteous, the wicked in the age to come, and when it's used in conjunction with the word eternal, because that's the thing that's the kicker here, it means the result of, not an ongoing action. Therefore, if we were to go back to this here, we should read that, but these will go away into eternal punishment. Their punishment will have eternal consequences. Not that they will be punished for all of eternity, but the punishment, whatever that is, will then have, that'll be the punishment that they will have for eternity. It will not be undone. It will not be reversible. Okay. What questions? Hopefully this is fun. Is this fun for anybody? I mean, I know it's the Dutch,
Yeah.
no, but
So is there any consideration for the differences in authors? You showed us 4 or 5, and some of them were from the same books, but
Yeah.
the argument that's presenting is that the use of eternal in those examples is thus that it's the consequence of the action,
Yeah.
not, that the action lasts for that
Yeah.
period. Is there any consideration for differences in authors? Are there any other, uses of the word eternal that could be used just, to go the other direction?
I think those, I'm almost positive that those are the only ones in the New Testament that have eternal something, right? An out of
Okay.
action. So I try
Okay.
to pull out all of those to
Right.
give you the wide range of those to show that. I'd say to answer your question more specifically, this is actually just a matter of Greek grammar. Right, it'd be the same thing like in English. I mean, it wouldn't matter if you wrote something or I wrote something, the grammar should, if we're using correct grammar, should provide the rules around how you would interpret that, right? So this is just Greek grammar. Um, Sometimes certain authors will, like Paul, might use reconciliation to highlight, or actually, sorry, Paul and James might talk about, certain concept, certain word, and they're going to use it slightly differently, even though the word has both meanings, but one of them has a different emphasis than the other. So in that case, you would say, well, how does James use that word? How does Paul use justification? Because James and Paul, even though the word justification can mean both things that they say, Paul uses justification with a different meaning than James does. All right, so that'd be a great example of author specific, where you'd want to look at Paul's usage of it to determine what Paul's saying. But this is actually just Greek grammar, right?
So that follows the rules of hermeneutics, keeping it in context. But what if, like eternal, we talked about at an earlier session, its meaning in Greek is for a time or of an age.
The same thing in
Right.
Hebrew too. Yeah.
Yeah. And so to we're not testing anything like an Archimedes tested the crown for gold. This is just keeping in context who's talking and who they're talking to
Yeah, I mean,
in
all
their
we're
grammar.
all we're trying to say is that the Greek grammar allows for one or the other, and if you need to then figure out, well, which one is it, the verse itself isn't going to, you're not going to, you can read this all you want, and there's nothing within the context that will necessarily help you to decide between Rich, A or B, right? So we went to a broader, we we went to a broader context, which was, how is a noun of action that specifically uses eternal plus? So, not something else, but eternal redemption, eternal salvation. So let's look at all of those usages outside of this passage, and specifically also look at what does it mean for either the wicked or the righteous. And so when we do that, the broader context of the New Testament will tell you that if all the rest of them are resultant, the results of, then it would be really, this is the reason why I put this one down here as neutral and negative, because the negative part of it is, if you want to hold that this verse here is talking about ongoing punishing and not the result of the punishment, then you're basically saying we're going to make this the exception to the rule. That was my whole point of showing you the other stuff is, but then you'd have to give a justification. Well, what is your justification? Well, the justification for someone who holds this view would have to be some other verse that clearly shows eternal conscious torment is the right view. Then they could read that back into this one and say, my justification for taking this one as meaning different than all these other ones is because these other verses over here prove my point, therefore we must read this one a certain way. Does that make sense? But within the verse itself, you can't do that.
Is there a name for what that is called when you study that way, taking a broader view?
Hermeneutics.
That's just
Yeah, hermeneutics is,
broader view.
yeah, we could go, like, hermeneutics has there's certain rules of hermeneutics, and we could go like,
have it.
yeah, we went back to, but
Specific.
what is the big picture? Here's the thing. What is the big picture? What does it actually say? What did it mean to the hearers that it was written to? What does it mean to us today, if anything at all, as far as application, right? Okay, and then is there any action on our part. Like that right there, those points right there are sort of the big picture way of looking at it, but then you've got actual rules of hermeneutics underneath it. But that's a good way to do Bible study. Like, what did it actually say? And we've kind of went through some of these, and it's like, well, it doesn't say anything about time. So it might look like people are thrashing around and fire and whatever else, but there's still no time element there. Like, so you got to figure out what does it say and what doesn't it say, right? Okay. Yeah. All right. Hey, guess what? We run into another one here. Okay. Okay. 2 Thessalonians 1, 5 through 9. All right. So again, this one says when they come to this, they say, well, hey, take a look. Well, actually, let me read it first and I'll tell you why they will use this. It says this, this is evidence of the righteous judgment of God, that you may be considered worthy of the kingdom of God, for which you are also suffering, since indeed God considers it just to repay with affliction those who afflict you, and to grant relief to you who are afflicted, as well as to us, when the Lord Jesus is revealed from heaven with his mighty angels in flaming fire, inflicting vengeance on those who do not know God and on those who do not obey the gospel of our Lord Jesus. They will suffer the punishment of eternal destruction away from the presence of the Lord and from the glory of his might. Well, again, this sounds pretty good. I mean, this really does sounds good. Like, they'll suffer punishment of eternal destruction away from the presence of God. Well, away from the presence of the Lord, that sounds very much like the separation argument, right? Okay. So that's why this one is very popular with people at ECT. The destruction is eternal, and it's done away from the presence of God. Therefore, death equals separation. Okay. Well, I don't like the word away from because it's not in the Greek.
No, it's just separation.
Separation's not in there. That's what I'm trying to say, Mike. There is nothing in there that the word separation is not in there. And I'll get into it in just a moment. Okay. Actually, the word that's not there, the word that is there is from. It should say, suffer the punishment of eternal destruction from the presence of the Lord and from the glory of his might. Away is not there. Shut out is not there. Okay? So that's stuff that's added and it's not in the Greek because the interpreters have a certain view of what they think hell is like. So like the NIV puts shut out from to make it look like this punishment happens as they're shut out from the presence of God. Well, shut out is not in the Greek. The only word that is there is apo, A-P-O, which is the word from. Okay, and we'll get into that in a moment. So, yeah, well, see, so here's the deal. I mean, here it actually does change it because it certainly would allow someone to take a view on eternal conscious torment if it says away from. Although, to be honest with you, even if away from or shut out from was there, it wouldn't, to me, make a bit of difference because all three views believe that the wicked are removed from the judgment of God and thrown into hell. So it doesn't really, it's actually not really a point at all. But my point is that sometimes the language that gets put into your translations that's not in the Greek can make you think a verse says something that it actually doesn't say because the translators are trying to help you to provide more clarity to the verse that they think should be there, but that's not really in the Greek. Okay. All right. So here we go. What's the case? Well, this does say that the wicked suffer destruction, right? And that it says that destruction will be everlasting or eternal, right? So if that final punishment is eternal, it means that that the people have to be conscious for that, right? You can't punish someone who's not conscious. I mean, you can kick a dead body around all you want, but it doesn't really help to punish someone. You only punish people that are conscious, right? Okay, so that's kind of the case for that. Now, like I said here, the problem with this, and the reason why this verse is used quite heavily is because the translations put things away from or shut out from that are not actually there. And that gives people the idea that, in fact, oh, well, that supports my idea of separation. So we've already kind of covered that. Now, for instance, here's the NIV. If you read the NIV version, which is not a literal translation, right? NASB is literal, right? ESV is more literal. NIV is less literal, right? It's word for concept, not word for word, right? So in the Bible translations, you've got word for word over here, which is literal, like we're trying to literally take word for word. Makes it sometimes a little hard to read because that's not how languages work. Or you've got word for concept, which is what the NIV is. It's trying to say, oh, well, we think we know what they're saying here, so we're gonna give you the concept over here. It's not a word for word, which is clear because they put words in there that aren't in the Greek, right? Just to kind of give you an idea of how that works. So NIV says here in 2 Thessalonians 1:9, it says they will be punished with everlasting destruction and shut out from. Well, again, shut out is not in the Greek. From the presence of the Lord and from the glory of his might. I'm supposed to highlight or emphasize shut out. So you can see there that if you read that, that certainly seems to say something something different, okay? Now, let's talk about this. Is this actually a very strong verse for eternal conscious torment or not? All right. Now, first of all, I'll be honest with you. I'm not really sure if I was someone that was an advocate of eternal conscious torment. I'm not sure I'd want to use this verse necessarily because what does it say? They will suffer eternal what? Destruction. That's right. By definition, destruction. Not eternal.
Suffer when you're been destroyed. Yeah.
Correct. I mean, so I mean that's my first point here is that it doesn't say eternal torment, eternal suffering. It says destruction. Now, they're going to what they're going to do is say the word for destruction can mean ruin, right? Someone has suffered ruin, and so they're eternally ruined, right? We'll get into that here more in just a second. But you know, at face value, you know, it says that they're going to be destroyed, right? Okay. Now, here's the other question, though, that comes up is why does Paul, if destruction is what Paul meant, and this is from the eternal conscious torment side, well, if Paul meant that destruction was what he meant, why did he add the word eternal there, right? I mean, because destruction, like you said, Jeff, destruction means destruction. I mean, why does Paul have to add that there if, in fact, we should just read destruction as being destruction? So, you know, we think that Paul is trying to say something different by using the word eternal there, right? And so what they say that God, you know, Paul's using eternal there to mean that the destructive process has to be going on. Because if it was just destructive, you know, Paul would not say that. He would say they'll be punished with destruction and shut out from that. That would make the point. If what we meant is people are just going to be destroyed, that's what it is. But they say, well, Paul adds eternal. Well, that must be put in there for a certain reason. And what Paul is trying to tell us is that it is destruction that is being done eternally, right? Okay. So the person is always always undergoing a process of destruction for all of eternity. Does that make sense? No, it doesn't sound like hell because I don't think that's the view of hell at all. It sounds like some people's view of hell, but I don't think it's the biblical view. Oh no, certainly. The destruction being talked about here happens in lake of fire, but whether or not the lake of fire is a continuing, never-ending process of destruction, where the person's never destroyed. Okay, I just want you to think about that before you ask your question here, real quick.
Yeah.
Think about what I just said. Paul says they will suffer destruction, but on eternal conscious torment view, the person's never what? Destroyed. They're always in the process of sort of getting destroyed, but they're never destroyed. They're always in the process of burning up, but they're never what? Consumed, burnt. So I want you to keep that in mind. Yes, Bill, go ahead.
I was going to say destruction, the way I get it, if my house burns down, it's destroyed.
Correct. And that is
But what do I do?
yes.
I can rebuild it so that it's not destroyed. But if it's internally,
Correct.
nothing's going to come there anymore for whatever reason.
Yeah,
And so
100%,
that's
100%,
why eternal really, because destruction you can always rebuild, at least conceptually.
Correct. So you just stole my last slide.
Oh.
Yeah, thank you for. I mean, this is where I'm talking about. You got to think a little bit logically about what's going on here and what the claim is. But yeah, you just stole my last slide, so this will make it super easy for me. Okay, now Here's why this doesn't make any sense. And you've kind of covered this. Destruction is a binary action. Something is either destroyed or it's not destroyed. You can be doing things to something that's maybe causing some damage, but there comes a certain point where you destroy enough damage has been done where you say the thing's destroyed, and up until then it hasn't been, right? Like you could have a chair where someone damages the paint and they chip it off and do whatever else, but it's not destroyed. It might be damaged. It may not look pretty, but what happens is when you knock out that one of the legs, all of a sudden that chair becomes destroyed. Now, to your point, we're not talking about where you could put the leg back on, but that's the point. Up until that time, you could do lots of stuff to the chair that would be, let's say, unpleasant to it aesthetically. But until you actually knock that leg out, or you knock the, I don't know, backrest or whatever the case is, you haven't destroyed the chair. But at a certain point, you knock off that leg, it's no longer a chair. It's a cushion, maybe. You could knock out all four legs and make it a cushion, but now it's no longer a chair. It's destroyed as a chair. Does that make sense? Okay, so destruction is a binary action. It either is or it isn't. The Bible talks about the wicked being consumed, and the Greek word is katakaio. Consumed, katakaio means to be fully consumed with nothing left. That's the term that John the Baptist and Jesus used for the wicked. They're not just consumed, but they're totally consumed with nothing left to burn. Well, that is the definition of being consumed, not of being burnt and an ongoing process of burning but never being consumed. The Bible says that no, they're actually consumed, katakaio, which means totally burnt up. So, this is what you were just saying there about the house, right? About the whole thing. So here's the odd thing. Think about it. If God never destroys the wicked, in other words, the destruction process is not completed. If God never completes the destruction process, and he knows in advance that he will not complete the destructive process, eternal conscious torment, right? That's what they believe. How can it be said that he's destroying them? Because he knows he never will actually destroy them. They'll never be destroyed. He's doing things to them. He's making it very unpleasant for them, but they're never ever destroyed, right? So it makes it very difficult for that. Now, that is a view that is very commonly held. Now, those that hold the eternal conscious torment obviously have figured this out, and so they've come up with a second way of understanding destruction that they think kind of gets over that barrier, right? Which is this. What they say is that, Paul's not talking about the process of destruction, of like the person burning and burning and burning and whatever else and whatever. Not talking about the process of destruction. They're talking about it like an eternal state. The person is just in a state of ruin. It's like if you were a billionaire and all of a sudden you were bankrupt and living on the street. You've been ruined, right? Your financial life has been ruined, and theoretically, you're going to be a pauper the rest of your life. That's what they say is, the destruction doesn't have anything to do about being destroyed. It has to do with being in a state of ruin. And ruin really means that the individual, the wicked, cease to be persons that are usable for the intention God intended for them. Does that all make sense? And when you don't do that,
That makes too much sense.
yeah,
Not in the concept of even,
yeah, 100%.
you know where I'm,
Yeah, 100%. Yeah,
I'm talking about.
yeah, 100%. And so what I'm saying here is that that was what they would say is it's not an ongoing process of destruction. That when the person is now, because you aren't redeemed, and you can't have fellowship with God, you're now not suitable for what God intended for you, and therefore you are ruined for all of eternity. So that's kind of the way they do. They sort of redefine destruction as to be ruined. Okay, and this, of course, is one of the Presbyterian, very famous Presbyterian theologian Albert Barnes puts it this way: the meaning then must be, he's referring back to the 2 Thessalonians 1:9. The meaning then must be that the soul is destroyed as to the great purposes of its being, its enjoyment, dignity, honor, holiness, happiness. It will not be annihilated, but will live and linger on in destruction. All right. Now, okay. It doesn't sound, yeah, I'll be honest with you. Yeah, in case you haven't figured it out, I don't hold this view. Okay, okay, in case you haven't figured it out. I got, yeah, lots of reasons for it. Yeah. I just don't think, I don't think it's a biblical view at all, but we'll look at the biblical verses and we'll kind of walk our way through it. But, you know, this whole idea of ruin, and we'll get to that. Can the word for destruction mean that something is ruined? The answer is, in Greek, the word can mean that. Okay? Now, let me just ruined. Now, here's the deal. So what they'll do is ruined. So here's what they will do. So they will look at things like when Jesus says that the wineskin, you don't put new wine in old wineskins because the wineskins will be what? Destroyed or ruined. Okay? Okay? And so the Bible does talk about things being ruined, a house being destroyed is a house that is ruined, right? So they'll say, well, look, I mean, it can just mean ruined. In other words, the wineskin no longer is suitable for its purpose, right? Or the house is no longer suitable for its purpose. Therefore, we're right to interpret destruction here as meaning that the person doesn't serve its purpose. And here's the one thing, and I don't have this up here. This is just sort of free for you. And if you want, I can get you some references to it later on. Here's the interesting thing. When you look at the different uses of this word, what you will find out is that with very few exceptions, and we will talk about one of those next week, with very few exceptions, when this word is applied to immaterial, or not immaterial, material non-living things, it has the connotation sometimes of being ruined and sometimes of being destroyed and obliterated. Like a wall could be obliterated and wiped out. And the Bible talks about taking the idols and you break them down and they're like dust and you throw them up in the air. Like that would be destroyed in the way that we've been talking about. But also the wineskins would be another example of saying, well, the wineskin's not literally like destroyed. I can still see it there. It just doesn't hold wine anymore, right? But when you look at that and when it's used of things that are not living, it can have that word of ruined. But when it's applied to people, what meaning does it have? To be destroyed, to be killed. And if you want to go through the Old Testament, the Septuagint version, or the Hebrew version of the Old Testament, you go to the New Testament, when it's applied to people, it means the person is killed, wiped out, destroyed. We will talk about one use of it next week, but it's the exception rather than the rule. So here's the thing, when you take a look at it, why is it okay to apply the ruin to things that are not living? Why wouldn't you say, I killed that wineskin? You can't kill, I mean, can't kill wines, can't kill a brick or a rock. So it's appropriate. I mean, that's what you do when you take a sledgehammer to a rock or to a house, you destroy it, you don't make it usable for its purpose, and sometimes you destroy it bad enough where it doesn't exist. Sodom and Gomorrah is a perfect example of God destroying that, where it wasn't just not usable for its purpose, it just clearly doesn't exist anymore. I mean, you won't even find any remnants of it around. But when it's applied to people, it means that it's death. And you can go all the way back, and we can just even look at the usage of it just in the gospel accounts of Herod trying to destroy Jesus. And he went and destroyed the babies. So when it's used in reference to people, with rare exception, I will say rare exception, it always means the individual is killed. It does not mean that someone is, their life has been ruined and they're not the person that they could be and whatever else. It doesn't have that connotation. That all make sense? Yeah.
Well, then if they are saying that they're just no longer suitable for God's purpose for them, is the death of their sinful nature? If something has to die.
No,
then-
death is just separation. In other words, on the view, whatever happens to the person in hell, like any kind of physical torture or torment or things like that, some of them actually even deny it now. It's become so unpopular that they'll even deny that there is anything, because it's hard to defend God, to be honest with you, on that view. It's really hard. What they'll say is that what Jesus is talking about and what the Bible is talking about is that the second death is the fact that you were intended to be in a relationship with God. You cannot be in a relationship with him anymore. You do not have his love, his grace, his mercy. You don't have none of that stuff. And you are eternally separated with him by yourself or with others in this place, excluded from him. That's what hell is. So death just means separation. This is why I started off with Genesis, is because the way they get around this whole thing of death, dying, perishing, extinction, whatever else, is just to change those words and say they all mean separation. Therefore, what hell it really is, forget about what flames might mean and whatever else. We don't know. They're symbols and blah, 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 whatever else. They're symbols. We don't know. What's really important is that it means separation. That's what death actually would mean from that view, primarily, which is
But that's that view.
that's that view. Well, that's not my view, but that's their
Case.
view. No, I know what. I clearly don't think it's a case, and I'll present the case that I think. I just am walking our way through some of these ones. Okay.
I think I'm hanging out with other people like me and all hanging together. No?
Yeah.
I don't think there's a wicked party going on anywhere.
There's not, because there's going to be weeping and gnashing of teeth, depending on how long that lasts. That's not really a party scene. Okay, I'm just going to finish. I got two quick slides here, and I want to finish this one out. And then I want to give you some homework for next week, because next week I want to finish this off and even start conditional immortality. And then, so we'll basically have, I think, 2 more weeks, and then we'll be done. So for those of you that are hoping to get out of hell, you got 2 more weeks. But we should be done. But I think it's important for us because, again, this concept comes up all the time in the gospel accounts and the rest of the New Testament, and it'll be important to understand that. All right. Yeah, that's right. You might, yeah. Okay. So this is a quote. I like how Joseph Deere puts it this way. This is what he says. He says, and this is actually where I was saying you stole my slide. One might ask, and people do, and he's referring back to 2 Thessalonians 1:9. One might ask, and people do, why the Bible would say eternal destruction to mean literal destruction. After all, couldn't the Bible have just said destruction and made the same point as it does in other passages about the final fate of the wicked, for example, Matthew 7:13? There is, however, a reason to qualify this as eternal destruction. Not all destruction lasts forever. If a building burns down, it can be rebuilt. The material that made up the building may be burnt up forever, but the building itself was not subject to any permanent destruction. Similarly, all humans suffer destruction of the physical body at physical death. However, that destruction is reversed at the resurrection. It is a destruction, but not an eternal one, since it is reversed and therefore is temporary. At Christ's second coming and final judgment, however, the destruction of the unsaved in body and soul is never reversed. They stay in that state of destruction forever. Therefore, for emphasis and clarity, it is called eternal destruction. All right? Okay, so I think you can clearly see, I don't think this verse says, I don't think it says anything about, I don't think it's very strong at all, right? From making apo to mean something that it possibly isn't. And again, some of the translations I think get it right. King James, Holman, ESV has it in their note section. Okay. And Glenn People says this. He says that people are forever removed from the Lord's presence by means of destruction. This is similar to the way we might talk about a battle at sea where a ship is blasted out of the water. In other words, they're removed from the water by the blast. Now, here is what I think. I actually think this is the better way to think about this. And I'll go back really quickly to 2 Thessalonians and just show you this here. It could be, as the ESV notes, that God is himself the source of their destruction, the very opposite idea that the punishment is being separation from God. In other words, if you go back here and you read 2 Thessalonians, instead of it saying away from, if you just take the Greek for what it says, they will suffer the punishment of eternal destruction from the presence of the Lord and the glory of his might. That actually ties into much of the Old Testament motifs. Think about that. This fire from God, the Old Testament motifs. Think about this. The fire from God, from Sodom and Gomorrah, that comes from God. He didn't need to have kindling down there and have someone start the fire. Like, this is fire from God that comes down and literally consumes. Moses is told to take off his shoes, right? Because he's standing on holy ground. The priests were only allowed to go. That's exactly right. The Bible calls God a consuming fire. In other words, his presence. The priest that would go into the Holy of Holies once a year, if they didn't go, if they were like, Nadab and Abihu, and they went in there and offered incense that was not asked for by God, when they walked into his presence, what happened? Boom. Like they were destroyed from his very presence, right? You even see Isaiah chapter 6, where he sees God and this, he sees this magnificent vision of God, and he, a righteous, by the way, a righteous prophet, buckles and basically says, I'm not worthy. I'm absolutely not worthy to be in your presence, right? So it's the very presence of God is, in this case, if my view is correct on this one, that they suffer eternal destruction from the presence of the Lord and his glorious might. Now, we will get into anyway, I'll just sort of leave it at that I believe it is that when Christ is there and he judges them, that is his presence and his power that is the destructive force of hell. Like, he doesn't need kindling. He doesn't need to go chop down a billion trees and then have someone go to the local Chevron and pour some gas on it and then throw people in there. Like, it's his actual presence and power that destroys the individuals in hell.
All-consuming fire that didn't consume the bush.
Well, no, that's it. So the burning bush, before you ask your question, the burning bush is actually a reverse of the situation, because in the Septuagint version of the Old Testament, it says not katakao, or not burnt. Katakao means to be burned up. So the oddity of that one is that his presence didn't consume that. But in the Old Testament, the motif of God as a flaming fire, as a destructive fire, as his presence that comes down and destroys all the wicked, that's a very common Old Testament motif. Well, I think Paul quotes from the Old Testament all the time. I think Paul is just pulling from that and saying, look, they're destroyed by the very presence of God. Jesus is going to stand there, and his very presence is going to destroy the wicked. Now, I don't think, to be honest with you, I could be wrong. This could just mean that they're destroyed from separation, like it is a distance thing. Either way, it says nothing, though, about whether or not it's eternal, because we've already talked about this idea of eternal destruction is either an ongoing action or a resultant word, and we've already kind of discussed that. And so I don't think that this one holds, I don't think it really holds any water at all, to be honest with you. Oh, yes.
I was thinking of Lot's wife as an example of,
Yeah.
she exposed herself to God's glory or wrath or whatever, to his presence,
She was disobedient.
and, became a pillar of salt and was destroyed.
Well, and you think about, it was Elijah and Elijah or Elisha, that the king, I think it was Elijah, the king sent to go bring him back in, and he wanted to punish him and do whatever else. And so he sends out 50 of his soldiers to go out there and capture him, and calls down fire, burns them all up. The king says, well, except for one, king says, well, I still need him. So they send out another 50, right? And a fire from heaven falls and does what? Consumes them all. Sends out another one. They're like, don't, please, just come with us, please. The whole thing. Think about another good one would be Elijah up on Mount Carmel. Think about what happened to that. You've got rocks, you've got a bowl that is saturated with water, and the fire of God, Rich, to your point, God is an all-consuming fire. And you notice that all the different symbolisms that we have, most of them are around hell, revolve around God being fire, or around fire being the destructive force. Thinking about Elijah, though, on Mount Carmel, what happens? The fire of God comes down and does what? It consumes the sacrifice. It consumes what else? What else? The sacrifice, the water, and the stones that made up the altar. Literally, the idea there is that this consuming fire of God literally consumes everything. Didn't burn it. It literally wiped it out. So everything was completely burned up. So God is presented as this fire. And in fact, earlier on in this verse, sorry, I'm going to end this. I am going to end this right now. I promise you. I promise you. Here, notice he says this: the Lord Jesus is revealed from heaven with his mighty angels in what? In flaming fire. And in flaming fire, he comes down in flaming fire to do what? Inflict vengeance on those who do not know God and do not obey the gospel of Lord Jesus Christ. They will suffer the punishment. What's the punishment? When he comes back in flaming fire, they're going to suffer punishment from the presence of the Lord. He comes back as a flaming fire to inflict vengeance. I think even from the immediate context here, the from his presence is better than to think it as a separation. Does that all make sense? All right. I know we're way over time, so I gotta stop it for there. I will say, next week, read Revelation 14, 9 through 11, read Revelation 20:10. That will put us to the end of the verses that are used by eternal conscious torment. So, sorry, Revelation 14, 9 through 11, and Revelation 20:10. 14, 9 through 11, 20:10. I'll have a few other remarks about some theological issues with this view that I think are significant. And then we will start with conditional immortality. And then the next week we'll do conditional immortality, finish that up, and we'll get back into, conditionalism. Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, thank you, everyone. Appreciate it. We'll see you next week. Bye-bye.